So this is Jaroenthong, Kiatbanchong, and this is his gym in Bangkok. So he had me moving around so that he could see what I'm about, which you'll note a lot of these fighters do. The way he's watching and trying to like figure out what my tendencies are and kind of an overall diagnosis was interesting throughout the entire session because I'm not super familiar with Jaroenthong, but in watching his fights, he's all about this super relaxed energy. He's very much like Samart in that sense. But he's southpaw, but he can switch stances really easily. He's a very good boxer. He's really good with his hands. And his like hyper relaxed, like super relaxed style is almost a technique to itself. It's really incredible. But this is a kind of difficult session to do voiceover for because there's not a whole lot being taught at any given time, but he does give me a whole lot of technique, but he watches me a lot. So here he's jumping in to teach me one technique, which is how to get out of the way of like a leg kick. So you can see how you just kind of like pull your hip back a little bit. You just kind of shift your thigh out of the way. You don't want to stick your butt back. If you watch him, you can see how he just brings just enough out of the way, and because he's not sticking his butt back, he's able to counter really quickly. So see how he's not moving his back leg at all, and his front leg barely moves, and only if it needs to, really. It's just kind of straightening the leg. His energy is crazy. He's so sweet and quiet. He talks really quietly. He's like a little kid, but then he's got this like incredibly relaxed I just split your face open thing like in his ring presence. So here he's trying to get my guard in a better position. I guess I was kind of dropping my right hand a little bit. But here, it took me a while to figure out what he was trying to teach me. See how he's like barely blocking this right? So here he's trying to explain to me how to kick and then block off of it. So it's like a floating block. So you have to maintain balance all the way through by doing a floating block like this. And he's just trying to get me to do it right first so that he can show me the context. But see how he just brings his leg back very naturally, and then it can turn into a block if he needs it. It's not like a super defined movement. Instead, it just kind of relaxes back into a block. But even look at how he catches my kick in that block. See how his hands come down to kind of pat it, and his block actually is a little bit under it? He would be catching your leg. And look at his the spacing of his legs, like his footwork as he's doing all of this different stuff. That's his balance. See how measured that was? This is when someone's coming towards you. See how he just steps to the side, and then he's kind of yanking on my wrist, my neck ever so slightly, but he's basically just kind of forcing me to head dive in the direction I was already going in. I'm asking him whether you use like the fleshy part of your forearm. So you kind of need to step past them as they're stepping towards you and pivot off to the side so that you can just kind of like shove their head in the direction that they're already going. He even looks incredibly flat-foot, but you can see how light he is on his feet despite how flat it looks. So here he's showing how to kind of like dip out of the way. See how he moved his head up like that? He was telling me I have to keep my head down. He's like, you don't go like forehead to forehead, but you want to keep your head tucked into the side of somebody. And this is what allows him to have the kind of control that he's dragging me around with. Like, don't float your head, but keep your head tucked in. And that way you can feel everywhere your opponent is going. So see how you can feel where my knee is going to be? And so he can block or turn. So here's showing how on the swim in, you can move someone. He was saying that he never lost to a knee fighter. But see how he's just kind of dipping his body slightly out of the way so that my knees either have no impact or miss entirely. And there he's actually putting his hip into it a little bit. And then he just tips to the other side. So he's using different techniques basically to just interrupt and snuff my knees. But that little spin he just did was incredibly disorienting in what I was trying to do. And he's basically just using his feel for me and footwork. That way that he just shoved me off right there, he did to Nampon really beautifully. So when someone grips him up top, he uses his shoulders to snuff the grip, and then he can pop you off over the top. And here, he doesn't know I'm a knee fighter, but he's showing me all the ways that you can kind of like stymie a knee fighter. See how he's just keeping his distance by using his shin to kind of keep my hips in one position, and then as I try to adjust and like move around him, he's just shoving me off or changing directions so that he maintains the control all the time. So he wants me to knee first and then turn the knee into a block. This is something that I've learned from quite a few fighters. And he likes to keep doing it. Like, the more you lean against the rope, you can keep switching sides. And so I need to control his arms because he's showing me how he can keep punching me in the face. Look at the difference in our body positions. Look at how relaxed he is overall as he's blocking my hips here. And see how he's controlling my arms with his arms? So even as I try to get around him, he's controlling me both below the waist and above the waist with complete relaxation. So see how the shin stops his knees? And then my arms should be controlling his arms. Which they're not. I'm outside of his guard for no reason. So here, again, he's just showing how to create the space that he wants. So as I'm trying to come towards him, he's just going to be interrupting by teeping my legs. As I try to kick, he can teep either my belly or my standing leg, and it kind of has a similar complete off-balancing effect. But he wants you to teep sideways. Here he's showing that if you teep vertically, your foot can kind of slip. So he wants you to turn your foot sideways, which is something that Samart did in one fight, like really heavily. And so it was kind of called the Samart teep, but he actually never taught it to me when I worked with him. But a few trainers have really emphasized this sideways one. They say it's harder to catch, and it doesn't slip. So here he's just trying to get me to use the timing and distance on that. So he's showing how if someone's coming to punch you, that keeps them at a farther distance, and if they're coming to kick you, it's going to knock them off balance because they're on one leg. So basically the teep is a first line of defense that is kind of multi and almost universally useful. Look at how comfortable. And then as I go backwards, he takes up that space automatically. So he wants the knee to come up higher first. He kind of makes a big deal about this. And I wasn't entirely sure in the session what this emphasis was at the time. But see how he's actually blocking a number of things before he teeps by bringing his knee up so high. So it's actually, for me, difficult to teep people at really close range sometimes. Bringing the knee up really high first solves that problem. But I maintained my balance even though he spun out like that, because I was controlling the teep the whole time. If you try to do a really long teep that kind of submarines up from below, you can lose your balance. And here he's showing how to just parry the teep out of the way. So he'll show me something and then show me the counter to something. So I was asking him, do you kind of like move your body out of the way when you're parrying the teep? And he's like, yeah, you can, but you don't want to go too far back because you want to be able to reach them on the counter. So see how he barely moves backwards in order to just be able to clear my foot? But he's not going back a lot when he's parrying those teeps. It's not a huge step back. It's the same as like when you're just drawing your legs straight to get out of the way. So he was showing how if you're too rigid, you're just going to get kicked because you're standing in one spot. Look at his bouncing and moving. He's basically showing me that this is the kind of energy you need in order to, one, be able to move anywhere you need to move, but two, it's less predictable because you're not just standing there. Like, it's still strong, but it's not like taking up space in this like I'm going to be a tank way. He was a very slippery fighter, but he didn't go backwards. He was slippery in space. See how he's stymieing my kicks just by putting his knee up like that? That's brilliant, especially because he was so good with boxing. So he would basically just use his legs as defense like this, and then he's still in punching range. Like, he doesn't have to do a lot to keep me at the range that's best for him. He kind of stops me from taking the range that I would want. He put himself in the ropes to allow me to like try different things, and I had no idea what to do. And he just steps out of the way. So here again he's doing in the clinch, waiting for someone's knee, and then see how he swims into my guard and then can throw that upward elbow inside. That's when people are swimming in the clinch. So if I try to swim in, do the upward elbow, and then he was outside my guard there and throws the elbow from the outside, that's kind of like Jaroenthong. But he makes a really important point here. See how I can't get to him because he has a strong arm? Like, I basically can't elbow him because of his arm. So he says wait for the knees to go, because when people are working on their knees, their arms aren't as strong. So see how he waits for the knee before throwing that elbow? There's no way my arm can be strong enough to stop his elbow if I'm busy kneeing. He's showing me a photo of him with Decker. He said he elbowed Decker like this. It's bottom right on that little collage. Even though it's kind of difficult to like voice over all of this stuff, something to pay attention to is that a teacher like Jaroenthong, like what he's actually working with me on, he's not doing pad work with me. Like, we're just moving around. It's all technique. And then he just puts it into this flow. Like, he's like, okay, now we get back to playing around with it to see how it fits together, or like what the next thing is going to be, because it comes up as observation. This is incredibly valuable stuff. See how he's showing me on my punch, he's gonna kick me, but see how he's like, see how you drop your left hand? Don't just kick in the middle, kick someone in their damn head when they're trying to punch you. Because my left hand just naturally comes down. Look how loose his hands are when he's doing that. See how he just kind of was rocking back, like taking the space, waiting for me to come in, preparing for that kick. So now we're getting into boxing, which he's got this incredible, like, jab, uppercut jab that he did in this fight with Nampan. He did it like 40 times. So here he's working with me on this uppercut, and he's saying that there are two distances. There's one that's kind of like close and up, and the other one is much longer. He's like, no. Whatever you're doing, no. Look at his back foot and how he uses his hip. He makes my stance just barely wider, which is mostly for balance. Watch him do it, though. See how much power comes up in that? And it looks like he's like bowling. But look how balanced and comfortable. See how it's like a circle? It's like on a train, that like part that goes around the wheel. Look at the difference in my stance and his stance. I'm like all in one line, and his feet are broad, like shoulder width. So see how he kind of like leans outside of my stance so that he can come under my front hand with that uppercut. But he keeps telling me there are two distances for the uppercut. See how it's coming from his shoulder? Look at how his elbow disappears as he like it appears behind his body and then rolls through. He's trying to show me this circular motion that he was just doing that's super relaxed. Mine is not. See how his body turns? And it ends up coming so straight at the end. I don't have full control of mine. Like, I keep hitting different spots. If he was holding a mitt, I'd be missing it on some of those. Look at his shoulder and his knee. Pop. He's so loose. So he's basically saying how, like, you go back and forth and can just keep throwing these punches everywhere because your body shifts back and forth to, like, right itself so that you're always ready for the next one. So when you see him shadowboxing, he can just keep going like that. See how his knee pops out when he's throwing that hook? It's a little bit like Chart Chai. So I was, hooking too close to my own body. He's showing how you have to like reach out just slightly because you're not actually that close to your opponent. I have a really hard time with this one. Look at the bend in his knees and look at his feet when he throws the punches, how they are so flexible coming up on the balls of his feet. And you can see the way he balances himself with his feet and his knees. Just watching him shadowbox is so instructive. Oh, man. See how he leans his weight back when he's doing that front hook? He pulls his weight back. And then he also has this bouncing one where he's bouncing into it. So his weight can go in either direction. They're two different punches. He's trying to get me to understand this energy of this like looseness and lightness, so that you're actually pulling your whole body into the punch. And look at how stiff in comparison. Like I just don't have the mechanics that he has. But see how everything flows together for him, and like the width of his stance all the time. After I throw that punch, I'm done. Like my balance is such that at the end of the punch, I don't have something for the next moment, whereas his bounces into the next thing. So now he's putting it together with kicks, but it's the same. Like he doesn't have to make adjustments to throw the kicks. The kicks come out of the same lightness and movements that the punches do. See how there's emphasis on the end of his strikes, but none of them are like the end of what he's doing? See how that like dodging out of the way flowed into his head kick? That's what he's trying to get me to understand with the bounce and the energy, is like have all of your stuff flow together. I'm trying to think ahead, like how am I going to get to the kick? Whereas he's like the kick comes out of where my body just was. So here he's showing the flexibility from his waist. See how he can move just his upper body? He's showing how that rigidity isn't a style. He's like, it's very easy to fight people who are really rigid because you always know where they're going to be because they stay in one spot. Whereas his looseness and relaxed flexibility, he can move anywhere. That's me. So he wants me to just move around again so that he can see me trying to experiment with what he was just talking about, which is this looseness and bouncing and kind of like improvising by letting the movement flow by itself, kind of. I'm not super thinking a lot, like I'm not trying to like get to certain combinations or anything like that, but you can see the huge difference in how I kind of like can bounce between things and then I have to stop to throw the strikes, whereas his flow like right out of it. So here he's making my block come out a little bit, and he's showing me why. If you don't open your hip slightly and someone kicks your leg, it just collapses. So here he's showing how you get someone into a pattern, right? Like you throw the kick a couple of times because you know they're going to block. And then when you know they're going to block, you throw the teep instead. But I have a super hard time with this because I had not learned anything about the golden kick yet, which comes up more straight. So I end up coming really wide and then having to like change angles in order to get to that teep, which does not work. So that one worked, but then when I try to do these like my normal kind of wide kick and then I like come around and in, he's like, no. He's showing me how not to do what I just did. Like fishtailing with your kick. So even if someone has a really nice block, like a really consistent block, the center of the body is usually open, which is a great place to target, but it's hard to get to. So you kind of have to like trick your way into center shots, even though it's open a lot. You can just see even in like my shoulders, and like there's not the flex in my knees the way he has everywhere. So he wants the teep to come out and back. See how my leg was not coming back to a position where I could throw anything off of it? Lazy about the reset. Like, everything comes back to where you can throw the next thing from. And again, I do a lot of shadow boxing. I've been doing this for years, and I tend to just do these straight lines back and forth, whereas he's super three-dimensional. Like, you'll see him move around and shuffle to different angles and really take up the entire space. That's the kind of thing that you learn by doing. Like, you just have to, when you're playing around, teach yourself to take up more of the space and be more three-dimensional. So he's showing me how to add those kicks in. And I'm having difficulty with this because I'm not picturing anyone in front of me. I'm just trying to quote-unquote do shadow boxing. I guarantee you he thinks about someone in front of him like anytime he's moving. He puts all of his moves into context in his brain. So there I'm like understanding someone being near the ropes kind of thing, so I can have like flashes of it.
Is he a switch fighter? Can you ask him about it? Yeah, about when does he
So Kevin wants me to ask him when he switches, because he is a switching fighter, but he's naturally southpaw and is generally southpaw. But then the question becomes, when do you decide to switch? So he's asking me where I normally train. We're having a convo. So here I get to ask him about the switching. So here he's showing me by kicking me on both sides. And he's like, you see how the opponent responds to things, right? So if I'm good at blocking on one side, don't kick on that side. If I'm not as fast blocking on the other side, you switch and start kicking on that side. So basically the like, when do you decide to change your stance? It's like when it's easier to hit the opponent on that side. So he does, what it seemed to be he was saying is that he switches on kicks. That's when he tends to do his switching. You can see how he's watching and like, he's taught me different elements of techniques that I'm working on, but the constant in what he does and the constant in what I do is this huge difference in relaxation. And it's really hard to teach someone relaxation. So as he's watching me, the thing that would like improve everything he's showed me is being able to do it loose. So he brings me back in. And he's going to show me these parries with the elbow. This is something that someone who keeps their guard up all the time could do pretty well, because your arms are in this position. But see how just barely moving his elbow determines whether my punch is coming inside or outside? See when I try to punch his body and he's gonna hit me with the elbow? Oh. And then there he's showing how to get slightly out of the way and then use a kick instead. So he's showing different distances. And again, that's that like head push thing by someone who's charging at you. So he's talking about how if you're facing a puncher, kick them in the body, because when you punch, your ribs and body are open, like necessarily, because that's how mechanics work. But in the same way that I was asking, when do you switch stance? And he's like, well, it depends on what your opponent is good at or bad at. That also, what your opponent is good or bad at determines how you're going to be countering them. So if they punch a lot, you're going to be kicking. If they kick a lot, you're going to be dealing with that with your counters. So basically, you shape a fight with how you fight, but the kinds of counters you're going to be doing are based on the strengths of your opponent. So I'm trying to picture an opponent more now in my shadow boxing, but in having done that, I've taken out a lot of the kind of levity and lightness that he was showing me before. So it's difficult to put all of those different elements together when you're trying to practice them. Like, they kind of come in stages, I think, naturally as a fighter. So first you get one, and then when you're good at that, you can start developing the next one. But trying to do it all at once is impractical, but you can find the things that are easier for you and the things that are harder for you, and know how to work on them from that. So he didn't like my knee. He likes long knees. And he doesn't fully lean back on it, but look at the angle of his body when he throws it. It's very long. So see how he's kind of like submarining under my punch with the way he does that knee? So I don't have to lean back, but I have to keep my upper body out of the way of the punch. He was saying if the knee comes up too high, you miss. Like, you're basically going to be kneeing air. Which of course depends on how deeply you step. But this lean back versus don't lean back on the knee seems to be divided between knee fighters and non-knee fighters. Knee fighters are like, don't lean back. And people who use knees but aren't knee fighters have these longer lean backs that vary for how much they lean back. But I think the main difference is that with knee fighters, they throw multiple knees, and for multiple knees, you don't lean back. So here again, I'm trying to remember the things he was telling me about, like punching the body and kind of the angles and elements that he's been working with me on, but I'm forgetting already what he just told me about how if someone's punching your body, that's when you kick them. So you have to then invert that for when you're thinking about I'm punching the body, is that there's going to be a kick. And so he's coming back to this relaxation thing. He's like, I've watched you like Frankenstein around the ring enough. I'm gonna work with you on this again. But he just wants me to move the way he's moving. He's like, you don't even have to throw strikes, just move around. So see how he's immediately making me three-dimensional, whereas I was like marching back and forth this whole time? It's like, just get out of the way a little bit. Like, don't be all rigid about it. I can't imagine what this looks and feels like to him, given how comfortable he is in what he does. Just look at the way he moves. See how the teep comes out of that bounce? He's showing me where to hit with it, and he wants the knee to come up higher first. Just what he told me earlier. So he wants me to like jab and teep and have these things like just kind of flow out of the flow of moving around. And he's not holding pads for me, but it's the same problem that people have in pad work, which is that you wait for someone to call something and then you have to stop and throw what they're asking for, which is the opposite of what he's teaching me. He's teaching me to just kind of like let the move flow out of the positions you find yourself in moving around anyway. See how that just flows out? Like, he's not bouncing so he can teep. He's bouncing and anything can come out of that. And the teep is because of wherever I am. So he's trying to get me to understand spacing by the way that he's like tracking me around the ring. If your opponent is cutting off the ring and tracking you around, all of my movement needs to be counter moving him, like not being moved by him, but evading in a way that then is controlling his space, which he's doing when I come after him, and I just don't have yet the ability to do. See that? See how he like moved out of the way of the teep but didn't actually like move anywhere? His counter, he was like right there.
Keep moving. His rhythm.
So he's showing me by example what he wants me to be doing. And I'm feeling in that example how effective it is, because the way he's moving, it makes me feel like there's nowhere to hit him. Or if I have like only one or two options, he knows what those options are, so it's much easier for him to have a counter ready, because the way he's forcing me into certain positions, he knows it's going to be like one of maybe 3 different strikes that I'm able to do from there.
His rhythm. His rhythm.
He's asking me if I saw this fight of his where someone was like leaning back or dodging back and he countered. So he's like, throw this kick, right? And see how he gets out of the way? And then he's explaining to me that after I throw the kick, to do this like secondary spinning kick as I spin around. And I'm like, this is so ridiculous that I don't even understand what he's asking me to do, because nobody does this. And he nails me in the face as I'm spinning around. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then he's like, no, let me show you the video of when I actually did this to a French kickboxer and knocked him out so cold. It's on YouTube. It's brilliant. I love when these guys have to go put their glasses on and like find their fights on their phone. It's one of my favorite things. It's very new that these guys can go find their fights on YouTube and show it to people. But it makes me really happy when they do it. Diesel Noise the best at it, but any of them, it's very cool.
Yeah, he never have a stress moment.
So Kevin and I are geeking out about how relaxed he is.
Seriously.
Same with the way that Nook just becomes like.
So there's this trainer up at Lana Muay Thai Nook. He's like 60
Yeah.
years old maybe, and he'll just put his knee up and is like, kick me anywhere, and it's like he's put up some kind of like force field. But you think you can't hit Nook because of how relaxed he is. It's the same with Jaroenthong. He's so relaxed you think you can't hit him anywhere. And so here he takes me into clinching, and he's starting out with the same thing he was showing me before, which is this keeping your head in so that you can feel everything. And then you wait for the knees to make your counter move. He stymies with his shoulders really well. And then see how he's waiting for me to knee, and then uses the tension of my upper body as I'm trying to like grab him to throw me off. He did this really well against Nampon, who's a knee fighter. And he doesn't do it like prolifically, but when he does it, it's really effective. So see how I turn that into 2 moves and he doesn't? He throws you off and then uses that moment of disbalance for the pull. See how he keeps turning? It's like all 1 move. It was a little bit better, but I didn't step my leg back like that. So I identified what the problem was there. So he's showing me how you can knee in the body or the face, but that his arm is kind of in the way of me getting a good face shot. So see how my guard is up in order to get it so that he can't grab my neck? If he steps and pulls my head at the same time, you can actually go around someone's guard. It's really good because people who know how to clinch will keep that guard and it's very hard to grab their neck. So you just go around it, like use the entire piece to off balance them. Interestingly, you can learn some of the best clinch techniques from non-clinchers because they know how to get out of it. See how he just popped my arms open with that like 1 move? So here he's showing how to use the knee into a block and anticipate where they're going to knee next for the turn. So he knees and then tucks his foot kind of to the inside of my thigh to control my ability to knee him back. And this is important. When people low clinch, they tend to keep low clinching. It's easier to break out of a low clinch and the ref will break it. But if you grab up higher, like underneath the armpits, it's much harder to get out. So this is, if someone grabs low, you do this can opener and like tuck your arms back inside. But now he's showing how to get out of the one that's higher, which is preferable because it's harder to get out of. So see how he's waiting for my knees? When someone has you up higher, you can do that one. If they grab your upper body, you're going to have to make adjustments to get out of that. But here, this is when someone is coming with a pretty straight knee. He does this differently from anyone else who's ever taught me the same move. The degree to which he spins me and doesn't move himself at all is amazing. And I think that it's mostly the push he does on the neck rather than the part on the thigh. See what he just did with his hands, that like scissor motion? I'm okay at like pushing the leg, but I always forget to scissor with my upper arm at the same time, like what he just did with his arms. I think he emphasizes the upper part and just kind of like ushers the leg with his hand, which is why you spin so hard when he does it. Is the power is up by the neck. So he wants me to come try to grab him. So see how he immediately tucks his head in and then waits for me and just does these little shoves. Like that doesn't take a lot of energy on his part, especially if I'm already on one leg from trying to knee. But you have to have at least your forearms on someone's shoulders to be able to do that. And it's a quick shove rather than like a push. It's not a sustained push. Look at him control my arm, like from the elbow. So I can't grab with my left arm, so now he has the better grip. And when I try to turn him, it's really easy for him to maintain his balance as I'm like struggling to come to the inside or find a better position. And he's showing how to lock someone out with his elbows. Like as I try to swim in, he just pulls his elbow in. But this is the good part. As I'm trying to swim in and he's blocking me with my elbow, look at how I become open on that side. So he waits for me to swim in and not only snuffs my swim in, but punishes me with a knee at the same time. So now he's trying to get me to do it. He's trying to swim in.
When you swim. Yeah. Yeah.
So now he's controlling my hands more. As I'm trying to grab him, he's just kind of parrying my hands around. And see how he gets that half position where he's got one hand on the back of my neck and the other one's controlling my arm? That gives him a really good feel for where I'm going, and he has control over me. See how he's pulling from the back of my arm? That was really good. Pushing and pulling in the clinch is really effective. So here is this like arm loop. You have to get up past the elbow, and I'm asking him about it because he actually has this incredible like wrench. Look at how he like turns his elbow in, and then he pulls me away from the hooked arm. Most people pull towards the hooked arm. And he says you can actually do both. See how I went towards the hooked arm? But he tucks his elbow in, which twists the arm he has hooked. Look at that. See how contorted I am?
Your elbow in. It's on the elbow.
And then I'm like head diving.
In.
So here I'm not remembering which way to pull because he does the opposite of what I do.
He pushes the elbow in.
Yeah, it's like this.
Yeah.
You can see he doesn't love the clinch at all. So this is something that a lot of Thai fighters are really good at, which is putting themselves in the rope and then basically just like stymieing you as you're trying to come in. He uses the ropes really well in this like bouncing off to create a little bit of extra space. So there again, he's controlling my off arm and then is throwing those elbows that he showed me earlier, where he like waits for me to have a weakness in my arm because I'm doing something else and then elbows over it. See how he's now like banana peeling? So I've got his arm hooked and I'm trying to like yank him around a little bit, and he's giving me the opportunity to do it, but he puts himself back in this position to show me. See how he just like, he just moved backwards and swings me. He's not backing out. Don't put your ass back and back out, but look at how this like pivot and then the tension in his arms just like whips me. I'm yanking and then stepping, which is not what he's doing. He's stepping and then letting the leverage of the tension in his arms do all of the pulling.
Double.
Oh man, and then he does like a bunch of them in a row. So I like, my head jerks down. And then when I actually do it correctly to him, he has a really hard time because of the whip.
Good.
That's exactly what he just showed me. That's why that worked so well. Jaroenthong's awesome.